Hello and welcome once again to Serving the Sire in 2 Samuel. This is a 15-minute Bible study we do twice a week, uh, just so that we can be in the Word of God more. And 2 Samuel is great in the fact of it teaches us a whole lot about interpersonal relationships. It's a dark time in the time of David. David committed adultery. And after that, the consequences began to roll down. And one of the great consequences was he had a son that watched David take a woman that he wanted, and Amnon's going to take a half-sister, Tamar. He rapes her. Absalom sees that, hey, David wielded the sword and destroyed his enemy. And so now I'm going to wield the sword and destroy the half-brother I despise, Amnon, and brutally murders him at the hands of his servants like David did at the hands of his army. Absalom flees the country. David leaves him in banishment for several years. And now we're in the midst of problems. And when you have problems, different people will react in different ways. You'll find there will be some who will try to exclude that problem, excuse that problem. David was guilty of this. David was in a quandary. Really, legitimately, he should have put his son to death. At maybe best, leave him with the maternal grandparents outside of the nation, cut him off from being the next king. Okay, not easy thing to do to your son. And so as David is hesitating, there's other people that are going to look at the problem, like Joab, who wants nothing more than to protect his position. He figures, if I can get Absalom in, Absalom is popular. Absalom is one that can manipulate. He's pretty close to Joab. And Joab believes if I can get Absalom restored, give him the kingdom of Israel, he'll be indebted to me. He'll be indebted to me, and I'll have it made in the shade. I'll have a ready-made position in the next kingdom. So basically, he throws his loyalty and friendship of David away because it's just not beneficial to him anymore. David is in his 60s. David is kind of beginning on the downward slide. He's been through a rough maybe 5 to 10 years where grief has just taken its toll on him. So he hires a woman at Tekoa. She comes in, shares the story. Two brothers in the field. One kills the other. The family all wants the one who survived to be put to death. And David says, let me have time to think about this. She says, no, we don't have time. They're here. He says, well, you tell them to come to me. She says, no, Lord, you need to make a statement. And he says, not a hair will fall on your head. Now the trap David has walked into, she says, David, why would you be so gracious to this one family and you won't be gracious to your own family? You have a son and he's been banished. And why will you not show him mercy? The exploitation of David by Joab has been laid. We pick it up right in the middle. I hated to have such a hard cut. That's why we've spent a couple of minutes examining that. Verse 17, she says, then thine handmaiden said, the word of my lord the king shall now be comfortable. For as an angel of God, so is my lord the king to discern good and bad. Therefore, the Lord thy God will be with thee. Now she tops it all off by saying, you're like an angel of God. You know exactly what needs to be done. And so she even puts the spiritual pressure upon him, albeit in a false way. This is like people that when it comes to certain elements of truth, will come in and say, yeah, but aren't you believers supposed to be loving? Aren't you supposed to be forgiving? Well, yes, sometimes love makes the hard choice. Really, if David loved God and loved his son, he would have judged him. There's some parents that won't discipline their kids, and David's an example of that because, I just love him too much. No, you're selfish. It's not love. Love does what is right. Love will make the difficult decisions. We're not supposed to judge. Well, the idea of judge not that you be not judged is you need to judge yourself and others like you would judge yourself. And you ought to judge yourself based upon truth, just like you ought to judge others based upon truth. Well, David's no fool. He's been around the block. It is probably assumed Joab brought the woman to David and is standing behind her. So David finally says this in verse 18, then the king answered and said unto the woman, hide not from me, I pray thee, the thing that I shall ask thee. The woman said, let my lord the king now speak. The king said, is not the hand of Joab with thee in all this? And the woman answered and said, As thy soul liveth, my lord the king, none can turn to the right hand or to the left from aught, for my lord the king has spoken. For thy servant Joab, he bade me, and he put all these words in the mouth of thine handmaiden to fetch about this form of speech. Hath thy servant Joab done this thing? My lord is wise, according to the wisdom of an angel of God, to know all things that are in the earth. Well, David, being no fool, says, I can kind of smell a rat in all of this. He said, This is of Joab, is it not? And did he not give you the story and put these words into your mouth so that you could maneuver me into a place where I could now be exploited to get what he wanted? And the wise woman of Tekoa, could have been too wise because she lets Joab manipulate her, is now wise enough to recognize this thing is going south. And I've manipulated the king. And so, I mean, man, does she turn on the spigot of flattery here. And goes back to, you're like an angel of God. My Lord is wise. And we don't hear anything else from the woman of Tekoa because I think she gets out of there about as fast as she can and says, you're right. This was Joab's idea. Joab put these words in my mouth. You're such a wonderful, wise, angel of God kind of a king. Thank you, king. Thank you, king. Exit stage right. Verse 21, the king said unto Joab, Behold, now I've done this thing. He said, All right, Joab, you got me. I've promised this woman justice. And so now I'm tied to, I've got to be just with my son as well. So I'm tied. So Joab, go therefore, bring the young man Absalom again. So he says, Joab, go do it. This is what you want. You've got me over a barrel. You've exploited the problem. This is not the best thing to do, but you bring him in. And Joab fell to the ground on his face and bowed himself and thanked the king. Oh, man, how hypocritical Joab is. He got what thank you, king. You're so wonderful, king. A grin on his face the whole time because he's getting what he wanted. And Joab said, Today thy servant knoweth that I have found grace in thy sight, my lord, O king, in that the king hath fulfilled the request of his servant. So Joab arose and went to Geshur and brought Absalom to Jerusalem. Would have taken probably a week or so to get him back. And the king said, Let him turn to his own house and let him not see my face. So Absalom returned to his own house and saw not the king's face. So the problem returns, but by the way, the problem is still there. David, in essence, says, I'm not going to see him, but you've manipulated me enough so he can return, but he's going to stay, in essence, under house arrest. He can come back, dwell in his home in Israel, have his land, and so forth, but I'm going to have nothing to do with him. Verse 25, this was a problem because Absalom was a greater problem than either David or even Mr. Joab anticipated. But in all Israel there was none to be so much praised as Absalom for his beauty. From the sole of his foot even to the crown of his head there was no blemish in him. And when he pulled his head, that's the idea of cut his hair, for it was at every year's end that he pulled it because the hair was heavy on him. Therefore he pulled it, and he weighed the hair of his head at 200 shekels after the king's weight. Now, I'm going to cut through a lot of that. Basically, about 5 pounds of hair. Unbelievable. Some believe maybe these were add-ons or gold that he would have embedded into his hair. I don't know, but evidently the guy had the head of hair. And, obviously they didn't, barbering and stuff was not a real big thing. And your hair would almost be like a covering for you. And so they didn't cut their hair that often. And so when he'd cut it at year's end, it would be 5 pounds. He was we would say it this way, a handsome man. He was a ladies' man. When he walked down the street, the ladies would turn and say, wow, what a handsome man. From his foot up to his head, the Bible says there was no blemish in him. I mean, he didn't have a big nose, or he didn't have droopy shoulders, or he didn't have a receding hairline, or he didn't have ugly eyes, or even his feet. Wow. I mean, if you could say the feet are beautiful, this guy had to be quite the guy. Matthew Henry very astutely points out, right, all these physical things were wonderful, but there's nothing said about his character or about him having wisdom. And beauty is vain, we're told in the Bible, but wisdom is not. And unto Absalom there were born 3 sons, 1 daughter whose name was Tamar. This guy could not let go of things. And yes, he loved his half-sister Tamar, his sister Tamar, I'm sorry, but he ends up naming one after her. Tamar's name, will you say what happened to Tamar? Probably she would remain in the house of Absalom. She would never marry because of this horrendous thing that took place. She basically would live in exile herself. And so he's going to raise up seed for her and keep that going. She was a woman of a fair countenance. So even his children followed after Absalom. So Absalom dwelt 2 full years in Jerusalem and saw not the king's face. So about 5 years have gone by now that Absalom has not seen David. Therefore, Absalom sent for Joab to have sent him to the king, but he would not come to him. And when he sent again the second time, he wouldn't come. So Joab underestimated David and thought that just getting Absalom back, David would take him immediately back in. No, David still has character, and David still says, yeah, I should have dealt harder with him, but at least I'm going to keep this thing in check. And so as some problems are excluded or excused, that would be David. Some are exploited, that would be Joab. Some are exasperated. Some people just come in and they just like to throw gasoline on the fire and watch it burn. This was Absalom. He calls Joab and he says, hey, I want you to go and talk to the king. Joab is through with Absalom. He says, hey, you don't have the pull with the king like I really thought you would have. And so I'm sticking with where my bread is buttered. It's David. And so I'm not going to mess anymore with Absalom. And it could even be that Joab had lost some favor with David because of this episode. Therefore he said unto his servants, this would be Absalom, see, Joab's field is near mine, and he hath barley there. Go and set it on fire. And Absalom's servants set the field on fire. He says, I want to get Joab's attention. This will do it. It's harvest time. And he tells the servants, go light his fields on fire. Let them burn. Whoa. Yeah, that was a bad thing to do. It's a bad thing to do today. But it's especially bad back in those days because that's how a man would provide for his family. That's how he would live through the winter. So Joab arose. Well, you got his attention. And he came to Absalom unto his house and said unto him, wherefore have thy servants set my field on fire? Absalom answered Joab, behold, I sent unto thee, saying, come hither, that I may send thee to the king to say, wherefore am I come from Geshur? It has been good for me to have been there. Still, now therefore, let me see the king's face. And if there be any iniquity in me, let him kill me. So Absalom says, you haven't helped me enough. And maybe as well, Joab likes this kind of thing. Maybe he thinks, Absalom's a little more strong-handed than what I thought. And he's probably flexing his muscles, Absalom. And Joab says, oh, okay. Well, this kid isn't as weak as I thought. And Absalom is saying, I should have stayed over in Geshur. And here's what we'll do, Daddy. I'll come and stand before your face. And if you want, go ahead and kill me. So he's going to really put it into David's lap and say, either kill me or put me back where I was before. So Joab came to the king and told him, and when he had called for Absalom, he came to the king, bowed himself on his face to the ground before the king, and the king kissed Absalom. So there's a partial restoration of the kingdom of this family, but David is still going to keep Absalom at a distance. And from a distance, as we get to chapter 15, this exasperated problem is going to get worse and worse until everything comes crashing down in full rebellion, as we'll see in the next chapter. I don't know what problems you may be facing today, but the best thing you can do is take them to the Lord. Take your time. Let the emotions settle and deal with truth. Be careful about excusing and excluding it like David. David kind of just kicked the can down the road and the can came back to really hit him hard. Okay? He should have dealt by truth. Joab exploited it. I'm going to get what I want. That's a shameful thing to do. To take advantage of somebody else's grief or problems is a terrible thing to do. Shame on people that do those things. And then there's those that will exasperate. They just love to see other people hurt. And they love to see other people in pain. And what a terrible person that is as well. Well, some practical things from chapter 14. Chapter 15, We see David on the run, but we also begin to see David at his best as well. We'll get into that next week. Hey, if you're in the area this Sunday, back to what we'd say normal services, 10 a.m., we're in the Gospel of Luke. And then in the evening, we're back in the Old Testament book of Isaiah. Would love for you to join us. God bless you. We'll see you next time.